Sip and a double cup. I'm getting high as fuck. I'm getting high as fuck. I'm getting high as fuck. A zip and a double cup. I'm getting high as fuck. I'm getting
it. The A10 is usually one of my favorite conferences. It's really going to have a down. I feel like it's going to have a down year this year. They've been getting less and less teams every year, but like when you talk about, the back half of it, Fordham, George Washington, George Mason, those teams are really, those teams are really bad. UMass, a team that used to be good a couple years ago. Richmond, a team that used to be good a couple years ago. They're kind of in a rebuild type. DeQuestion has been good so far this year. I don't know what if they are gonna be good enough to make a tournament or whatever. And they're usually a pretty bad team, so they probably won't do much. St. Louis and St. Joseph. St. Louis was good a couple years back, and they haven't been good lately. They don't look like they'll be good this year. St. Joseph's has a couple of good players with Newkirk and Dembry, but I don't really look at St. Joe's as doing much. They had a tough year last year, kind of rebuilding. Davidson, they have Peyton Aldridge, one of the better players in the conference, but I don't see them really being able to compete for a tournament spot. And then the top half of it's not terrible. But when you talk about LaSalle's just an all-right team. They got BJ Johnson, who's a good player. But it's mainly about these top four teams. Dayton, which I don't think Dayton is that great this year. They did get a good win against St. Bonaventure at home the other day. But I really don't like Dayton too much. I think that without Archie Miller there, I think they're definitely going to underachieve and not be as good as they have been in the past. And they have a lot of young players other than Daryl Davis, who's been good for them, and they have Antetokounmpo, the little brother of Giannis. I got to see him play a little bit. He's real lanky. Basically, make him play like the five, which he probably won't play that in the NBA. Lost a lot of players from last year though. So then VCU didn't really play that great in the non-conference play, an area where they usually get a good amount of wins. And they're just not really returning a lot of people. Justin Tillman, Jonathan Williams, and Durante Jenkins are the main guys that they brought back. And I just don't, new coach, Mike Rodas is the new coach after Will Wade left. I don't see VCU making the tournament. I usually try to vouch for the A10 teams to give them a reason to put in, but this year VCU I don't have any reason to vouch for. Rhode Island will probably get in the tournament. They played pretty good in their non-conference. They challenged themselves, and they definitely very well could get first. They have probably the best player in the conference in E.C. Matthews. I really like E.C. Matthews, and then a good team around them: Stanford Robinson, Jared Terrell, Jarvis Garrett, Jeff Dowden, and then a freshman that they brought in, Fats Russell, who's been good for them. So I like Rhode Island. I think Rhode Island's a tournament team. I think they could get a couple wins in the tournament too. So I want to see what they can do. And now my team that I really like, my number one team for this conference is St. Bonaventure. They got good wins in the preseason against Syracuse in Maryland. So they beat two ACC teams. That'll help on Selection Sunday. And they have two of the most prolific scorers in the country in Matt Mobley and Jalen Adams. Jalen Adams is preseason A10 Player of the Year, which I think E.C. Matthews will take. But Jalen Adams has been good. He was hurt too at the first of the year, so they won that game against Maryland, I think, without Jalen Adams, which was really good. And in the game against Syracuse, Jalen Adams took over, and he's going to have a lot of games like that this year where he's going to be able to take over. This is a guy that I've been watching for probably 2 years now, who's been really good. That I really like. Him and Matt Mobley are really good together. Let's talk about the West Coast Conference, Gonzaga. I think Gonzaga, it was definitely St. Mary's could definitely, compete with them for the West Coast title this year. But I think Gonzaga is going to get it. Gonzaga is my number one team. I like what I've seen out of them. They've rebuilt very well. Josh Perkins he was more of a glue guy last year. He's a star now. Jonathan Williams, who was really good last year, has shown a lot of potential on the inside. He's able to shoot, a lot of hooks and stuff like that. And then Killian Tilly. Love Killian Tilly from France, really good player. He got to play sparingly last year, and now he's thrust onto the scene this year. So you really get to see how good he is. Salas Melson, a guy that has been a glue guy, off the bench type guy for 2 or 3 years now, and he's getting to start now. So he's a veteran guy. And then Ryu Hachimura from Japan. This kid's really good. He's got a lot of potential. Obviously, he's growing, and it's going to take a couple years for him to get to where he's at. But I like Rui Hachimura, and then Zach Norvell, who redshirted last year. He's a really good 3-point shooter. He's really helped this team kind of get a 3-point shooting presence other than just Josh Perkins. And then Corey Kisper was playing a lot at the first of the year, and he had an ankle injury, and I hadn't seen as much of him lately, but he's another good player. Now, when you talk about St.Mary's, St.Mary's is very scary. They did lose 2 bad games in the preseason in the Wooden Classic, two games that you expected them to win, and on Selection Sunday, are definitely going to haunt them if they're just barely in or creeping or whatever. But Jock Lindell is their best player. He's the center. He's from Australia. Most of their guys are from Australia. They recruit out there very well. Emmett Nair, another Australian senior, very good conductor. Very good at passing and stuff like that. And then a couple other guys that finish out their starters is Calvin Hermanson and Evan Fitzner. Hermanson is a good defender. He can step out and shoot threes. Probably their second best scorer. And then Evan Fitzner is 6'10". He's a guy that plays the 4 and stuff like that. Another guy that plays some is Tanner Krebs, another guy from Australia. I will say Calvin Hermanson and Evan Fitzner are not from Australia. But yeah, I mean, this is a good team. They play very well together. Randy Bennett has done a great job of building this program, and I really like them. The only other team I'm going to talk about on the West Coast is BYU. BYU did lose Nick Emery at the first of the year, so they know Nick Emery. That's a tough loss. That's definitely going to not help them when they play St. Mary's and Gonzaga. But they do have T.J. Hawes, who's a legend in the Utah area. Elijah Bryant, who's been good, and then they have Jonas Childs, who's an inside presence, who went toe-to-toe with Jock Lindell in their first game when they played BYU. So I like him. So done with the West Coast. Let's talk the Mountain West. Mountain West, to me, is on the up and up. A couple years back, the Mountain West was a conference that always had about 3 or 4 good teams in it. I remember New Mexico was always pretty good. They had Cameron Bairstow, and I think his name was Greenlaw or something like that. And then when you talk about, San Diego State, when they had Coach Fisher, they were always very good, a very good team. And then, but now Nevada is coming on. Eric Musselman is building this program, doing a great job. Let's talk about the back half, though, of the Mountain West first. Not going to talk about New Mexico, Air Force, San Jose State, Utah State. Those teams, to me, are on the back half. Colorado is even in that, back half. Their best player is Priest Nix, who's pretty good. Jeremiah Page is another good player for them. When you talk about, I think next on the list would be Fresno State. They have a couple of I think they're the Taylor brothers, and then Jaron Hopkins. They're all 3 good players. The best scorer, though, is Deshaun Taylor. And I just think Fresno is in a conference where it's going to be tough for them to get out of it, but they're not a bad team. I saw them play some good games in the preseason. Next on my list is going to be Wyoming. Wyoming's got some prolific scorers. When you talk about Hayden Dalton had 36 against San Diego State earlier in the year. They have a kid named Lewis Adams who looks really good. I like him. And then they have Justin James, who he had a really good game the other night. So Wyoming's in a situation where they can literally have like one of those three guys go off each night, and they really all can score almost like they could probably all score 30 on any night. So any of those guys can go off for them. So Wyoming's a scary team to play. My next team on the list is going to be San Diego State. New coach, obviously, Brian Dutcher is a guy that's been a long-time assistant of Steve Fisher. But this is a pretty good team. A kid named, I think, Jalen McDaniels has been coming on lately. Pretty tall, lanky kid who's a freshman. A transfer, Watson, who's been good. And then, Trey Kell and Malik Pope are the veterans that have been on the team for a while. Malik Pope's probably their most veteran. He was around back in the day. And like I was saying, the San Diego State, back in the day, they had Kawhi Leonard, and Kawhi Leonard was really fun to watch. New Mexico had what's his name? He's in the Tony Snell. Tony Snell was a good player at New Mexico. And then UNLV was good. So, but anyways, going on, UNLV is my third team. I really like UNLV. I really want UNLV to make the tournament. To me, UNLV is that team this year for me that probably won't make the tournament, that I really want to make the tournament. They don't really have that tough of a non-conference schedule. They didn't get that win against Arizona. But when you talk about their team, they got to transfer in what's his name? Shakar Justin, who's like one of the top JUCOs in the country. And then the main reason this team is really good, though, is because they got Brandon McCoy. Somehow they pulled Brandon McCoy, like a top 10 player, and he's really good. I like Brandon McCoy a lot. They did lose to Boise State a couple weeks ago at home, so that doesn't bode well. But the tournament teams in this conference, maybe UNLV, but for sure, Boise State and Nevada are definitely going to be talking about being in the tournament. Now, Boise State, best player is Chandler Hutchinson. He can light it up. He's definitely their best player, NBA talent. Justin Jessup is another. He's a good three-point shooter. He can get hot. But mainly it's Chandler Hutchinson for Boise. And Nevada has a prolific team. Lindsey Drew and Jordan Caroline are some of the guys from the team last year. Lindsey Drew is a good little guard. He can steal the ball pretty well. Jordan Caroline, one of those guys that's on the inside. He's not huge, but somehow he gets a lot of boards. He averages about a double-double. And then the transfers that have came in, Kendall Stevens from Purdue has been awesome. He's a really good three-point shooter. And then Cody and Caleb Martin. These guys, to me, were guys that were out of control, guys that didn't look like good players when they were at NC State. And I think that the reason that they were that way is because they had this like mentality of like, oh, we're about to come back out the game, like, and now they don't feel that way. Like they play like mainly the whole game, and I'm convinced that they really are good players. They can shoot, they're lanky, they defend well. I really like them, and I think they're going to really help Nevada out this year, go pretty deep in that tournament, or in the tournament, I should say. A couple other teams. Talk about Conference USA. I like Middle Tennessee. Giddy Potts, Nick King. Obviously, you have to make it through your tournament. Western Kentucky, another team from the Conference USA that I like. They got a couple. They got like a good amount of players. Hollingsworth, this big white boy, number 23, Johnson. And then you talk about Darius Thompson. He transferred over from Virginia, who's been really good for them. And they got a couple other good players too. Marshall, John Elmore is a really good three-point shooter for them. Louisiana Tech has a couple of good players on their team. I think his name is Boykins. And then they have one more. I can't think of his name right now. Let me see here. They have Jacob Boykins, and then the other guy that I like is Daquan Bracey. That's the other kid that I like. And then going forward, the MAC, Buffalo looks like a good team this year. I like Buffalo out of the MAC. Another team out the MAC that I like, Ball State. They beat Notre Dame earlier in the year. They have a kid named Taylor. What's his name? Taylor something. I think his name's Taylor Pearson or Taylor Parson or something like that. Real good shooter. He had a really good game against Notre Dame. And then Western Kentucky's a team that's definitely on the radar. They got this really good kid, Josh Davis, and then they have like the preseason, they have the preseason conference player of the year. When you talk about Thomas Wilder is his name. So they have a really good team too. They're definitely a team that needs to be looked at going forward. And like I said, Buffalo, I like Buffalo. C.J. Massingberg is their best player. But after that, let me see if let me get these last couple of little conferences in that I want to get. I love the little conferences. Out of the horizon, Oakland. Oakland has Kendrick Nunn, and they have Jalen Hayes and Martez Walker. 3 really good players. Kendrick Nunn, every game that I've watched of his, he's had like over 30 points. Northern Kentucky has this kid like Drew McDonald who can step out and shoot threes. They're a really good team. They could compete in the horizon. Talk about the Southern League. The Southern League is really deep this year. Wofford has this kid named Fletcher McGee, and this motherfucker can shoot like a motherfucker. He's really good. Eastern Tennessee, they just rebuild every year. They made a tournament last year. I think they're the tournament team out of the Southern this year. North Carolina, Greensboro has this kid named Alonzo who's pretty good. They beat Wofford the other day. Furman has Devin Sibley, who's the preseason Southern Player of the Year. I think they can compete for that spot. And then Mercer has Strawberry. I think his name is Jordan Strawberry. He's the Strawberry that played in the MLB Sun, and they have this other kid named Ryan Holland, who's been good. So I have Mercer as a team that might, and some small teams that I like this year that their conferences, their conference isn't really much to talk about, but like I like them. I like Florida Gulf Coast with Brandon Goodwin, I think is his name. Brandon Goodwin. And then they have a couple good teams other in that conference, North Florida, Lipscomb. Princeton, I like Princeton this year. That Miles Stevens is a good player for them. They beat USC earlier. I saw that game. Stephen F. Austin, that's where Brad Underwood was a couple years back. I like him, or not him. I like Stephen F. Austin. They have a good team. They beat LSU earlier in the year by a point. They lost to Missouri by 1 point. So they're a good team. They should make it out of their conference. Bucknell really challenged themselves in the preseason, and I think they can make it out of the Patriot League. They usually do. UTSA is a team that I really like with Kevin Hervey and Neal. But they've definitely struggled to start Sunbelt play, and they've been a team that's supposed to make the tournament like the last 2 years, and every time they get to their conference tournament, they find a way to lose. Vermont and Albany will be battling it out in the American East this year. Vermont looks good. This kid named Anthony Lamb they have. Albany has Joe Cumo. And in Ohio Valley, Belmont looks good. Belmont definitely challenged themselves at the first year. They beat Providence, and they had a bunch of games against A-10 schools. Murray State's another team that's not bad in the Ohio Valley Conference. In the Summit, it's a toss-up. South Dakota State versus South Dakota. And then they have Fort Wayne in there. Fort Wayne, prolific three-point shooting team. They beat Indiana earlier this year. But South Dakota has Matt Mooney, who's good. And then South Dakota State's got Mike Dahm. To me, he's the best scorer. Maybe not. I can't say that. I don't know what it is about Mike Dahm, but every time I look at his stats, he's got at least 25. And like you can tell by the way, like you can look at a score of San Diego State or South Dakota State, and you will know how he's playing. Like he's a lot of their team. And then not to forget about the WAC. The WAC has New Mexico State, who I think beat Miami earlier this year. They got a kid named Zach Lofton and Eli Chula, who are both very good players. We'll probably see this team in the tournament. Grand Canyon and Cal State Bakersfield and Utah Valley are some other teams in the WAC that could compete for that. Last conference I'm going to talk about, and I'll be done, is the Missouri Valley Conference. Missouri Valley Conference, losing Wichita State last year, but Wichita State's definitely been taking that tournament spot every year, so it's kind of good that they're gone. Valpo, Indiana State, Evansville are teams that I'm not. Those are the kind of the back half of the teams. Bradley and Drake. Drake started 3-0 in conference play, but I think Drake will fold. Eventually. Loyola had a win against Florida in the preseason. I don't think that they're really that good, though. I've been watching them, though, ever since that Florida win. I think they're a middle-of-the-road team. My top teams in the Missouri Valley Conference, though, are Southern Illinois. They have Scottie Pippen's nephew or something like that. He's real tall. He's like 6'10", pretty good player. Another kid named Sean Lloyd on the team. They're not a bad team. Northern Iowa really challenged themselves in the preseason. I kind of felt like Northern Iowa was going to be the team out of the Missouri Valley, but they've started 0-3. They lost 2 games they probably should have won, and then they got matched up at Missouri State. And I hadn't really got to see a whole lot of Missouri State, but I finally got to watch Alize Johnson last night. The kid is for real. He had 24 and 20 against Bennett Cook, who's bigger than him. I mean, not that he was matched up per se against Cook, but I like Missouri State out of the Missouri Valley this year, and they hadn't been in the Missouri Valley for too long. I like them though. Alize Johnson is a name that you'll be hearing for a while. And then Illinois State. Illinois State was the team that was second behind Wichita State last year. They lost Paris Lee. They definitely did rebuild though. They have a couple of good players. When you talk about what's his name? Phil Fain, Keyshawn Evans, and then Malik Yarbrough. All 3 of those guys are really good. I like Malik Yarbrough a lot. He's won a couple games for them this year. Keyshawn Evans is one of the best 3-point shooters in the country, percentage-wise, and then Phil Fain's a good inside force.
Visions of Biggie, Big L, and Tupac just looking at me. From the gates of heaven while the police booking at me. Open your mental while bitches give me brain with no dental. Y'all probably think I'm crazy for touching this instrumental. Shout out my cousin Ego, he know this shit.